Hello and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Scott Dill, and I'm on the business development team here at the Real Story Group. My colleague, Theresa Regli, who's our principal analyst, will be joining us on the line momentarily. And Theresa is going to walk us through some new techniques that have evolved over the last several years, actually, worth of research in regards to picking the damn solution that's going to be the right fit for your particular needs. In fact, Theresa just wrote a blog a couple weeks back that speaks to a bit of a reality check when it comes to the damn technology vendors and takes a high level look at how these vendors are evolving, but also really what are some of the risks involved with partnering with some of these different vendors. So certainly encourage you to take a look at that, as well as some of the other recent blogs that Theresa has published about this particular topic. When it comes to Real Story Group, who we are as an organization and what we do, we are actually a different sort of analyst firm than you may be used to. So what's different about us is we don't do work for the vendors that we evaluate within our research. And so we're able to take a bit more of a pull no punches approach when describing what they're good at, but maybe more importantly, where they're weak or could potentially fall short within your particular environment. And so you're going to notice that if you ever have taken a look at one of our sample chapters, is that we really don't hold anything back, because our main focus is helping technology users and buyers like yourself pick the solution that's going to be the right fit for your particular needs. We do that through our research. We also work on a select number of advisory engagements where we actually come on site, sit on the same side of the table with you as you're bringing these vendors in for demonstrations. And if you already have a DAM solution but aren't quite sure how well you're doing with that particular product, we invite you to try out our Real Score application, where you can actually assess your people and your process and your technology. And then if you become a subscriber to that particular product, you'll be able to see how well you stack up against your industry peers and then across industry verticals, and also utilize the research that we have already published on your particular vendor. Beyond DAM technology, we also cover 6 other marketplaces, but they're all focused on both digital workplace and digital marketing technology. And because we live entirely in that world as analysts, we're able to cover more vendors, and those will include some of the key mid-market players, along with open source projects as well. And these are the different topics in which we cover within the research. And in our next slide, you'll see all of the vendors that we evaluate within our research in our famous or infamous subway map, if you will, where each of the different technology sectors are symbolized by the different subway lines and colors within the map. Before we get started, just a couple quick housekeeping items of note. We will be recording the presentation, so our subscribers are able to access that within their library, and then we will send out the slides to each of the attendees on the call today. So with that said, I'll let Theresa take over from here.
Great. Thanks, Scott. Hi, everybody. Hope you're having a great day wherever you are. I'm in London and it's 5 o'clock, but I have not poured myself a gin and tonic yet, because I want to make sure that I deliver a very useful webinar to you all today, talking about how to select a DAM tool and talk about DAM technology a little bit. So Scott already talked a bit about this subway map. It's been interesting over the years to see how it's evolved, especially as I focus on DAM technology, to see how the big players in the middle of the map have expressed more or less interest, or had more or less interest in DAM. And I'll perhaps talk a bit about that on the webinar today. Scott was talking about some of my recent blog posts, and just last week I published one about the many lives of Adobe, and they're an interesting one to think about as we explore the DAM market briefly today. Just thinking about the fact that these big vendors will just keep gobbling up different sorts of tools, and that does muddy the waters for a lot of us when it comes to thinking about this market and thinking about how to select how to select these tools. So if you don't have a copy of this, by the way, please do download it. The URL is right down there on the bottom, and it'll give you a quick overview of the vast number of vendors that we evaluate. So one of the questions that you always have to ask yourself first, before I talk about how to select a DAM vendor, is it time to select a DAM vendor? Are you in the right place to select a DAM vendor? And we have a tool for that. There's an app for that to help you figure out if you're in the right place to select a DAM vendor. The first thing you need to determine is where are you on your effectiveness scale, and where are you in your capabilities? Because a lot of times people think that a system is going to solve their problem. So the right way, when it comes to the right way to select a DAM vendor, the first thing to decide is are you in the right place to do that, and do you actually have the knowledge, and are you equipped with the knowledge to select a DAM vendor at this time? Does your organization even understand what they're selecting? These are things that you really should ask yourself up front. I would say there's a very large majority of people who come to Real Story Group, and they're ready to select a vendor, and yet they don't even really know what's the right fit for their organization, because they don't even really understand what they're looking for. So the first thing we would encourage you to do is really to look at our evaluation application. You can actually take a trial of it for free, even if you're not a subscriber, and you can have a look at where you stand and sort of what your metrics might be and what your evaluation criteria might be. So we look at the expertise within an organization. We look at the scope of what you're trying to cover. So you might, for example, actually need to manage things that are outside the scope of a DAM, and this is the tool that'll give you some insight into that. What your process is in terms of governance and analytics, and how strong you are in those regards. And then finally, do you have the system capacity that you need at this present time? So this will give you a score. It'll help you understand where you stand today, and really where you might need to move the needle in the future as far as where you need to focus. Now, one of the nice things about knowing where you are is that then you can also have a picture of where you want to go, because these evaluation frameworks make you realize where you're really lacking. So perhaps you're really lacking in IT expertise, and you need a provider who's really maybe going to provide more of that service to you externally as a managed service versus something that would be on premise. So going through this process is really a learning experience. It's a profile of your organization, and it really helps to start to shape what you need to look for specifically in a DAM vendor. So that's number one. Benchmark where you are, understand what your capabilities are, know how effective you are or not potentially, and then you'll get a lot of information that'll help you move into picking the right vendor. Another thing that we would recommend that you do before you pick a vendor, and this is equally important to understanding where you stand, is looking at your big picture of marketing technology. So you can't just pick a digital asset management system in a silo anymore. It just doesn't work that way. When I first started covering this space about 8 years ago, DAM was just generally a standalone system that was owned by the marketing department or purchased by one of the designers that had a bit of a budget and installed, and there wasn't really discussions about integration, etc. But now DAM is really a foundational tool for a much larger MarTech strategy. And this illustration really shows how we need to think about marketing technology in a customer-centric way. So customers, depicted at the center here, they have all kinds of ways that they want to interact with you. And you probably, as many of you probably are marketers or product managers, are thinking about what are the journeys that you want to take those customers on so that they engage with you, so that they buy from you, so that they interact with you. And you need multiple technologies to make that happen. Digital and media asset management or marketing asset management is really just managing the videos and the images and the brand logos, etc., that tie into many other things like e-commerce data, like the marketing content that you have, the social campaigns that you're creating. It's a much more integrated and bigger picture. So before you select, in addition to knowing where you are, benchmarking where you are, you want to say, well, what are the other technologies that this needs to work together with? How open are those technologies? What kinds of APIs do they have? And make sure that you have a good sense of that before you go into picking a DAM. If you don't have a good sense of that, you might actually be picking a DAM before these other systems. You'll want to find out as you go through the selection process what systems or what other vendors has this DAM commonly integrated with, because it's going to be what really brings together your overall MarTech approach. So those are the first two things to think about. Think about this reference model. Think about where you stand as an organization, what your real strengths and weaknesses are, and then you'll start to have a good selection process. Okay. So let's talk about how to select, right? Before it was sort of the preamble. Now, how do we select technology? So this is an article I saw, I guess, a little over a year ago when I was in a taxi in New York City, and they have those television screens in the back of the taxi, and you're sort of sitting in traffic. And CNBC started doing this story about how nearly 70% of IT spend is misallocated, and that almost 400 billion of what's invested in our technologies projects fall short of expectations and returns on investment. That's a huge amount of money, right? It's a huge amount of money. So how do you avoid being one of those people, right? You don't want to be in that 400 billion. You want to be in the 200 billion of digital spend that's actually successful and effective. And I think there's numerous reasons why this happens, and that's what we're going to answer today. Why does this happen? Why do we make the wrong decisions that causes that huge of a percent of our technology projects to be a waste of time and money? And how do we avoid that happening in the future? Well, the first reason this has happened is that there's a massive amount of choice in the industries that we all are selecting from. So this is a landscape of the digital marketing software that we evaluate at Real Story Group. There's actually hundreds and hundreds of more systems out there in the marketing world. And for those of you who read Chief MarTech and follow Scott Brinker, he has a graphic that's so large that you need a massive printer to actually be able to read it. It's a huge and growing space, and I think actually probably this year, and our research director in the MarTech space, Kashyap Kampela, he agrees that there's going to be some implosion in the coming years because there's just so many. There's an excess of choice really in this space, but that's what makes it tough to pick. And this is one of the reasons that we make the wrong choices, is because we don't necessarily understand what is what. And vendors are very, in some cases, quite deceptive in terms of how they're presenting themselves, because they might say, well, we do digital asset management. And in fact, they don't necessarily do digital asset management. They think that just because their system can hold an image or hold a video, that's apparently a digital asset management system. But that is not the case, right? There's really a set of fundamental core features that DAM systems have. And I would say that probably 30 to 40% of the vendors that say that they're DAM systems actually don't do those 10 to 15 things. If you don't know what those 10 to 15 things are, I highly recommend you buy a copy of my book, which has a whole chapter on the 10 core of a DAM. But also, of course, in our research, we get into very specific ratings for how well these vendors perform in those core pieces of functionality. So the first reason that people pick the wrong things is because there's just so many vendors out there saying that they do things that they don't really do. Then there's some other reasons. So some traditional ways that people select software is, number one is, what's the horse race? Who's the leading vendor? I absolutely hate that question. Who's the best vendor in the space? And they'll go to a major analyst quadrant, and I'm not mentioning any names, but you obviously know who they are. And they'll say, well, we're just gonna pick the one up at the top, right? And that's the one to go with. And it's kind of similar to saying, well, I'm going out to dinner tonight, so I'm just going to go to TripAdvisor, or I'm going to go to Yelp, and I'm just going to pick the one that gets the most reviews or the most positive reviews. But you know what? That might not be the one that you want to go to tonight, because maybe you want a cheaper restaurant than that, or maybe you're really in the mood for Chinese food, or maybe you want a place that's romantic because you're taking somebody on a first date. There's a situation that you want to pick that restaurant for, and it's the same thing with technology. we don't think enough in the tech industry about what the situation is that we're trying to apply the technology to. We're being too black and white about it. We're just saying, well, there's a best vendor, and so we're going to pick that one. But the most expensive restaurant, just like the most expensive and fancy vendor, is not always the right one. So that's reason number one why 400 billion gets wasted every year. The second is that we tend to buy from people that we like, who are our buddies. And actually I have that numbered as number 3. So that's the one at the top right, where you might be wanting to buy from, your cousin or the person that you play tennis with or whatever it is. And I see that a lot where people come to me and they say, well, we just got to put this vendor on the short list because our CEO is friends with this guy. And so we have to consider that vendor. Big wrong choice, not the way to go. Peer pressure is not the reason to buy a technology. And I'm sure that's at least 100 billion of the wasted choices right there. The one on the bottom left, which was originally number 2, but I'm saying it number 3, is blind love. So it's like the love at first sight thing, where you see a demo and it looks so awesome and it looks so sexy. And you say, well, I'm going to take this tool home with me, and you haven't gotten to know it yet, right? So it's not a good idea. It's not a good idea in love or in buying vendor tools, and that's another reason why a lot of this the wrong tools get selected. And then number 4 is sort of the traditional approach to product selection of writing a really, really long RFP that's full of requirements, and you bring some big consulting firm in and you spend $100,000 with the consulting firm. They put together a lot of documentation for you, and yet no one is ever going to read it, and you end up sort of going through this long, laborious procurement process, and it doesn't really come to any great conclusion. So this is really, you could probably attribute 100 billion of wasted money to each of these 4 misguided approaches. And then number 5, I often call overreaching. People tend to buy the most expensive and the most sexy technology. They tend to buy the Millennium Falcon when they really only need a bicycle. And this is something I constantly sort of tell people, where maybe you could buy the Mini Cooper because it goes a little faster, it's a little more spunky and a little more powerful, but you really need to learn to ride the bicycle first, right? I spend a lot of time explaining to people not to overbuy. So when it comes to $400 billion of wasted money, this is largely why, because they don't want to sort of start at a simple introductory level. And the fact is, with technology, these tools evolve so quickly that you're going to probably end up replacing your tool every 5 to 7 years anyway. So by the time you're ready for the Millennium Falcon, it's going to be a completely different ship anyway. And so think about that as well. You really need to not overbuy and not overspend just because it looks so awesome. You really need to learn to ride the bicycle first. Okay, so how do you pick the right tool, right? That's all the reasons things go wrong. When it comes to picking the right tool, you really need to think about 4 fundamental things. And you put these 4 fundamental puzzle pieces together, and you'll be in that 200 billion of the properly spent IT spend. First is scenario. So thinking about what's the scenario that I actually need to apply this particular vendor in? What's the technology fit? What kind of deployment model? What kind of licensing model? What kind of integration points do I need? Partner, does this vendor actually get me? Do they understand my industry? Do they know what the heck I'm all about? Do I want to work with these people? And then finally, value. Is this a fit for the money that I have to spend? I often like to use the acronym QPR, quality price ratio. Is this the highest level of quality that I can get for the price that really makes sense for me to spend? It's if I can use a different same sort of restaurant metaphor, it's I'm willing to go out tonight and spend $50 on dinner. How can I get the best meal for that $50, right? So that's another thing. If you have $100,000 to spend, how can I actually get the best tool? So that's the value fit. Now, last year, which isn't all that long ago, we deployed a tool called Real Quadrant, and this was really our way of saying, all the traditional ways of ranking vendors is really just arbitrary, and it doesn't really think about the buyer. It purely thinks about a sort of business positioning and marketing positioning and the story that a vendor has to tell versus their real performance across different use cases in different industries. So what our tool lets you do is to go in and actually select what's important to you. So you're not just getting something put in front of you, like you're going to go to this restaurant, whether or not you like ramen, we're going to make you eat ramen. This actually says, well, I'm going to select my criteria, right? I'm going to say this is what matters to me. So this is an example of what you get to select in the digital asset management one. And the first thing you get to select is specifically what vertical matters to me, right? You don't care if you work for a media and entertainment company, you don't really care if the vendor has experience in government or nonprofit, right? You probably say, okay, I'm in media and entertainment, I work with advertising and creative agencies, and I might want to be doing some e-commerce, right? So you can pick those three, and then you can specifically say, well, here's the scenarios that apply to my situation. So you might be in advertising and branding, and you might also need to do multilingual brand management. You might need to do a little bit of all of these things. But what's nice about Tool, even if you do have to do all of these things, is that you can actually do percentages, right? And you can weight what's important to you. So what you have in this image here is the next screens, or after you actually pick the verticals that are important to you and the criteria that are in terms of the scenarios that are most important to you, you can then weight what matters the most. So in this case, we're actually weighting strategic considerations. So let's say that the modernity, it's a hard word to say, the modernness of the platform is most important to you. You can rank that higher, or you really need good professional services, you can rank that higher. And you don't really care so much about the product roadmap, you can zero that out. And that's actually going to give you a relevance, essentially, or it's going to change the data in the quadrant so that the most relevant comes up for you. So the quadrant, this is a blank picture here where sometimes if you're too extreme with your rankings, you actually don't get anyone that fits, right? And that's important too. Is that if you're weighting things too much in one direction, sometimes there's not a fit. And this is something that I think is sometimes hard for people to accept, right? It's kind of like when people date and they have a checklist and they say, well, I just won't consider anybody that's not, taller than me. It's sort of irrational in some ways. So we have to specifically say, okay, what is the range, right? What's the flexibility that I have in terms of the vendors that I want to consider? And that's why we allow you to tweak these things so that if you're not getting results that are appropriate for you, you can look at it in either direction. And you can do this across all the criteria. So I showed you the use cases and the verticals, and then this is the strategic considerations. And then once you tweak that, you're going to get a nice set of results, right? And this is going to be really specific to you. And you can see in the top left where we also allow you to toggle among looser fit, medium fit, or better fit. So in this particular case, I was picking software as a service oriented vendors or cloud oriented vendors that had particular strength in manufacturing and consumer product goods. And you'll get a totally different result, of course, if you say, I want vendors that are focused on video streaming and who are focused on, say, media and entertainment. You get a completely different set. And the nice thing about having these criteria be specific to you is that, of course, you can then go to your teammates, your management, and you can say, okay, this is really specific to our needs. And you can say, these are the criteria that I picked. You can also go in and say, maybe we need to focus a little bit more on customer service because we don't have an internal customer service group, and you'll really see who's strong where and who's not. So you can go in and you can play with this tool on our website, or I should say try out this tool on our website, and it'll give you a real sense of how to hone in on the right choice for you versus just what a generalized quadrant gives you. By the way, before I talk about the next slide, Scott, who kicked off the webinar, gives fabulous demos of this. So if you would like a more in-depth demo of the quadrant and how it works, please feel free to reach out to Scott. Okay, so what's really key here, in terms of the selection process? First, you really need to employ an empirical approach to winnowing down vendors. So you don't want to have this sort of puppy love, or my cousin Vinny sells this product, so I'm going to buy it, or I'm going to do a big long RFP or horse race. you need to think more about a user and a customer-centric approach. You need to be agile about it. You need to narrow down your approach through a series of increasingly detailed interactions, right? You don't just want to say, bring these vendors in, do a demo and pick one, okay? You need to think about demo, proof of concept, get your hands dirty, and make sure you're picking the right tool based on that. You want to understand the business scenarios you're trying to achieve. So that's really what our tool allows you to hone in on, where you can say, okay, I'm picking the scenarios that matter to me. You can emphasize testable narratives. And this is the key, is really you want to test at every stage, not just the tool itself, but the vendor and really how well they understand you and how you work. Then you want to make sure that you get beyond the halo. Even if there's some, big, famous, popular, sexy vendor. I mean, if I could tell you the number of times that Adobe gets thrown into a list simply because they're Adobe, happens all the time, right? That doesn't mean that you can be less rigorous just because they're famous or they're popular. In fact, you should be more rigorous if they're famous and they're popular, because you want to make sure that they're actually being selected for the right reason and not just because everybody knows their name. And then finally, think about services, right? So I talked about that partner fit. That's super important. You want to do careful diligence on the implementation team. You want to know who's going to be on your team, who you're going to be working with, and have they ever worked with another company like yours? Do they really understand what you're all about as an organization? So keep all these things in mind, and this is what will put you in that 30% of successful technology implementations, and not that 70% / 600 million of, 400 billion of wasted investment. Okay, so that's our quick overview, 27 minutes, and I think I'm just going to hand it back to Scott, who will give you a little bit more on our research before we wrap up. Scott?
Absolutely. Thanks, Theresa. And if you have questions, please feel free to enter those into the questions tab on the GoToWebinar control panel, and Theresa can get to those momentarily. As she mentioned, I'm happy to walk you through a demonstration of the Real Quadrant application, so you can really take a more detailed look at how a shortlist can be developed based on your particular use cases and scenarios, and also really see which of the vendors that we evaluate within the research, and how well they could be a fit within your particular organization. Also, I did want to point out that Theresa is available and can be really an extension of your team as an advisor as part of our research subscription. So if that's something that would be of some value to you, please let us know, as she can help to either do a deep dive on a particular vendor or really validate your shortlist and take a closer look to help see how your current technology stacks up, but also what could be a potential fit if you're looking to bring a new vendor into your particular environment. It looks like a couple of questions have come in, so Theresa, I'll let you take those.
Great. All right, hold on one second here. I was sort of struggling with the window here has been upgraded on the GoToMeeting. Okay, so somebody asked how many vendors should be in my shortlist. It really depends on, frankly, the size of your organization and sort of how broad your selection criteria are. I generally tell organizations you should consider initially at least sort of 7 or 8. And then get a group together, your stakeholders together, to talk about what kind of weight your criteria. So just like we do in our tool, and just like you can do in our tool, initially you come up with that looser fit, and then when you say, you know what, we really need an organization that has a great strategic roadmap versus we really need an organization that has perfect ratings for customer service, you're going to get different results. So that allows you to get from that sort of 7 or 8 down to about maybe 3 or 4 that you want to send an RFP to or invite in. Somebody asked, what are the 10 to 15 factors that define a DAM technology? So there's something called the 10 core characteristics of a DAM, and if you can find those on the internet pretty easily at dammaturityModel.org. And if I could list them off the top of my head, let's see. It's basically ingestion, transformation and transcoding, storing metadata, it's workflow, it's search and findability. I guess that was 6, and I'm not remembering the others. Distribute and transform on push out, embedded metadata. Those are the sorts of criteria that, for instance, a web content management tool or a digital, I should say, a document management tool doesn't do. So it's not just being able to ingest any file. You know, a DAM can ingest and parse Adobe Creative Suite files. So it's not just how it ingests or what it ingests, but also what it functionally can do with the files. That's very different. So that's this list. If you go to dammaturityModel.org and click on 10 core characteristics, you'll be able to read those in detail, and that should help out. Somebody asked, are you covering all of the DAMs in the marketplace? We don't cover all of the DAMs out there. There's hundreds of them. We cover 30 plus that we consider the most significant for medium to large companies, since that's the bulk of our customer base. Then we have, according to our research, how important are workflow and collaboration features such as approvals, comments, scheduling, assigning tasks, etc. These are all criteria that we rate. So we look at workflow specifically different. We actually rate workflow differently from collaboration. Workflow in a DAM usually is just review and approval. It's not usually more advanced than that. Collaboration features is basically when you have something on a server and people can comment and mark up and do that. We rate everybody's capabilities in that regard, and we actually decided about a year ago to separate workflow from collaboration because they're really very different features. So that's a big part of our research, and if you need that data, we've definitely got it in there with very detailed ratings. Someone asked, should we look at separate vendors for streaming video versus static assets? Or are there sophisticated options out there that can handle both well? Yes, there are sophisticated options that can handle both well. They're obviously more expensive than choosing simple photo and image management tools. But one of the things I think is important is you're using the word streaming, which is different from just managing video. So to actually host and stream the video is a completely different market of technology. DAM systems do not actually, live stream video over the internet for you. You would need a CDN or a video hosting tool to do that. So DAMs will store the video and allow you to find the video, but if you actually want to push it and stream it, that's different technology. And that's a whole different market. So just keep that in mind. You can manage the video, you can put it through a workflow, take stills from it in a DAM, but to actually stream it over the internet is a whole different set of tools. Are you thinking about updating the 10 core characteristics to include more? Yes. The answer to that is yes. Stay tuned. We're actually talking about building it out to be the 15 core. So no specific plan yet, but we're thinking about doing that. And the last question was about future-proofing. How does one consider future-proofing a digital asset management solution? I think it's getting to the point where digital asset management, it's becoming a component of a bigger picture. So when it comes to future-proofing it, the key is to think about it in terms of a much larger picture of marketing technology and thinking of it as a service rather than a destination. So in the past, it's sort of like, well, I'm logging into my DAM and I'm getting my pictures or I'm getting my images and I'm downloading them and doing stuff with them. Now DAM really has to be a service that's available to a whole bunch of other applications, that's pushing images and video to all kinds of different marketing channels, e-commerce, etc. It's a much it's really a foundational technology for much bigger things. So it's not really about future-proofing the DAM itself. It's about thinking bigger, as you point out, company roadmap there in the question. That's exactly it. It's making it part of the bigger picture that's going to keep it as a well-oiled engine in a much bigger machine. So that's it. I think we're out of time anyway. So thanks for all your great questions. That was awesome. If you want to ask me anything else, you can email me or you can email engage@realstorygroup.com. You can tweet at us and we'll be happy to get back to you. And thanks for joining us today. Have a great evening.